Okay, so I'm completing what I need to do for the registration of this second activity. Again, what we need are just two things, the name and the label for it. So if you look at what I typed in, name is important. This refers to the exact name of your activity. So if you look at this right now, this should be corrected. My second activity is not Java, but it's second. The second one label just puts a label on the screen of your application. So whatever window you're working in, you have a guide, and your user has a guide as to where they are inside your app. So this could be anything you want. If you want to label your window as Kermit the Frog, or you're more partial to Miss Piggy, you can change it to whatever name you want. In a professional app, that of course would reflect the current function that your window takes care of. So that defines our activity inside the application. Then you might say, what is that for? Okay. This makes your activity active inside the app. Any other item that wants to call it can call it now. Then you might ask again, but what if I don't do that? Then you can't use the activity. So a couple more changes and we'll be ready to run this in our emulator. Now that our activity is active, it's registered as part of the app. Again, that's done inside the manifest. I'll close the manifest so we don't accidentally change it. We don't want to do that. I'll go back to main.java, and I can now fill in the section for my button. So we created a method that the button will call whenever someone clicks on it or touches the button. So now I'll add the code that will make that button call our second window. Okay, so this is the first line of code that we want. Intent, new activity equals new intent, this second dot class. What all this gibberish means is, one, Android makes use of an intent system. Intent is something that you want to do in your application. Whenever you want to call a second window, or whenever you want your application to switch to another section, that's what you use the intent for. So whenever I'm calling something else, I need to make a new intent. Activities are the actual files that the intent calls. So when I create my new intent, I tell it my current intent, which is my main window, and then I tell it where to go next, which is second. So this one is where I'm coming from. I'm inside my first window. Or in our case, it's called main screen, and it's being run by main.java. The second area, or the second argument it points to, is where you're going. So it's a new activity that I'm trying to call. Okay, in Java, the first side or the left side of the equal sign marks a template being created. And then the right side of the equal sign means we're reserving space in memory. So we're creating an intent class. We're coming from our first window, and we're going to our second class. This prepares the application for calling that second class. And to actually start it up, you have to start the activity and call new activity. Okay, so if you're looking at my code, you'll say, but Ronald, you still have an error. Again, we can correct this one because the program doesn't recognize intent yet. So we have to import intent. It will get added on top. This is now the import section of main.java. And these are the 2 lines of code that allows you to call a new window. And we're about ready to start our application and see how it works inside our emulator. Okay, I'll just bring this back to the original screen. Save everything. Make sure my emulator is running. So my emulator is running. And then I'll run this particular application. Okay, once more, we wait for Eclipse to finish processing. And in a minute or 2, we should have our application. And our first screen should show us a button and a label. Okay, so right now, Eclipse is in the middle of installing that new application. While waiting for it, you can stare at your Android screen, pick up coffee, read a book. Or wish for a new computer that's faster. But when you're developing in Android, the emulator really is slow. Okay, so we now have our application starting up. As expected, because of the changes that we made, our app shows the original Hello World label and the button that we added earlier on. I'll click on this button. And as you can see, it called our second window. Okay, from that very simple example, you can now branch off and do so much more complicated applications. And once more, call your mom, tell her the good news. You're improving as an Android developer. And you can go and look at more advanced topics in our next few lectures. Practice the techniques that we've looked at here. These are the simplest examples that you can look at. The implementations are much more complex, but this now allows you to go back and forth between different windows. You can actually challenge yourself and try to make one of the buttons in our second window bring you back to our first screen. So if you look at my second window, there are a couple of buttons here. You can treat it as an exercise and actually make those buttons work and bring you back to the first screen. And with that, I'll say good luck because our next few topics will be much more complicated.